talk about nurse practitioner job interviews, shall we? Things that you should be on the lookout for, red flags, questions to absolutely ask, and what I wish I would have known to look out for when I was applying for NP jobs. All of the things in that realm. In each episode of this mini-series, we will tackle a specific topic surrounding the NP interview. And today we're going to start off with a fun one, red flags. Ready? Let's go. Wish I had a red flag. That would have been a good prop. Anyway. Hello there. If you are new, I'm Liz. I am a family nurse practitioner and I am currently trying to figure out what to do with my life, but I worked in primary care for 3 years as an NP, and oh my, were there things I wish I had known or just asked about the job that I just didn't, because I didn't know. But you get to learn from my ignorance, so yay! I do want to say that some of the red flags have been experienced by me that we're going to be discussing and ignored personally by me, and some are things that my friends have experienced and as they have interviewed for various NP roles, and some will be things that you may not see as a red flag, because we all have different boundaries when it comes to ourselves and our work, and so take what helps and leave the rest, because some things you might be totally fine with that I'm like hard pass, and vice versa. So you do you. But as always, you do you, friend. All right, ready? Red flag number one, just pretend. A very large sign-on bonus. This is not a universal thing to the NP world, but whenever a company is throwing around a huge sign-on bonus, like $10,000, $20,000, I want you to see an enormous red flag waving. It may be totally fine. They may have just really needed to attract candidates, like maybe it's a remote location. But a lot of the times, if you see a crazy sign-on bonus, it's because no one wants to work there, and there is a reason. People are saying, no thank you, even though they're offering $10,000. That says something. This is especially a red flag if it is not local to you. If they are advertising like all over, I know a few people from my class who took jobs that were a few states away, and they had huge sign-on bonuses. Florida, I'm looking at you. And since they had no knowledge of the healthcare system there, because they obviously didn't live there, they had no idea that locally no one would work there because they treated their employees like garbage. So even if they were going to offer them, like I said, $10,000. So just if you see that, I'm not saying like say a hard pass, but really look at them with a critical eye. Second red flag, if they've never worked with an NP before. Now this isn't like a hard pass, but it's not always bad. However, if you are a new grad, just really proceed with caution. I was a new grad, and the very first NP, or she'd never worked with an NP or a PA, and she'd never hired one at her practice. And so it was just me. I was a baby NP and the owner, and she wasn't sure what I could do and couldn't do. And I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do and what I wasn't supposed to do. And it was difficult to communicate that on very well because I was nervous and I wanted her to like me. And once I did figure out what I was supposed to be doing versus like, because of the state board of nursing says like you as an NP can do this and not that, it was hard because then I was like, oh, I can't do that. And then she would forget and she was confused. And it was a little bit of a mess for a little while until you figured it out. If you are an experienced clinician in your state, this will not be as hard. You already know exactly what you can and can't do. And you'll be able to probably be more confident and not so overwhelmed and desperate that you will like advocate for yourself. But if you are like I was and you are a baby NP, just be ready to really, really look up what your scope of practice limitations are, what you expect, and understand what they expect. My collaborating physician didn't know, she didn't even know like what I was prepared to do upon graduating NP school, since she wasn't familiar with NP schools like curriculum or programs, and she'd never worked with them. And I could really easily see this situation turning into something where you get placed in a environment that makes you legally or ethically like uncomfortable, or you're taking on a role that you're not quite like ready for yet, but you don't know how to convey that back. And now you're both kind of locked in this weird situation because there's been a miscommunication about what you do. And I've also seen it go the other way where an NP is hired and they're really just, they've never hired one before, and they're having them just do like busy work for the provider and not letting the NP use their full scope of practice. One of my friends was at a job where she was literally like a scribe. She would go into the room with the provider and she would chart their whole thing, even when they left the room. She was basically just like charting and doing paperwork and answering phone calls. because he had never hired one before and she didn't know how to advocate for herself. It was just like a mess. I do want to say with that, like my experience was it ended up being fine. Once I learned how to communicate, I never had to do anything that I was uncomfortable with, but it was a lot of like the blind leading the blind. Like me trying to figure things out, her trying to figure things out. So just if you are not someone who is super confident and like willing to learn things yourselves, maybe just proceed with caution if you are a new NP and they have also never hired an NP. Third red flag, not offering any sort of like ramp up time in terms of your onboarding. If you are going into any position as a provider, they should give you a little bit of a warm-up period where you are seeing fewer patients an hour than the ultimate goal. You should also have discussed your ultimate goal of how many people am I seeing. And usually you start at a lower number so that you can get used to the charting system, how the office works, learn the patient population, and just like absorb your surroundings. If you are a new grad or working in a new specialty, this is essential, like since you'll be looking up things constantly since it's new and you need that extra time to just like get your feet out in front of you, under you. You get your feet under you. In the future, in a video where we talk about the questions to ask in an interview, I will cover more on this whole topic, so make sure to subscribe and catch that. And if you're watching this, you're probably an NP. I have some free templates and like handouts and things for nurses and NPs in the description if you want to go down there and snag some of those. But anyway, when you're asked about onboarding, when you ask about onboarding and they say that they'll start you at your full schedule, whatever that is for the office, advocate for a change to that policy that lets them ramp up, and maybe they say yes and you're like, okay, perfect. And if they say no, just run. That is not an environment that respects its practitioners, and that's a good rule of thumb in general. If you are ever advocating for something that makes you safer and a more supported provider, and they just like flat out say no without hearing you out or offering a different solution, that is probably not an environment that you want to be associated with. Fourth red flag, high turnover. Just like with any job, ask how long their staff, their healthcare providers specifically, usually stay. If it seems like everyone completes their contract or worse, like bails before it's even done and then they have to pay them back, that is a yikes. There is a reason why they are all running away. And even though the company will say like, oh, it's them, I highly doubt that. I feel like the common denominator is probably the practice. So, if everyone is running away, you should just do so immediately as well. Red flag number 5. I'm just going to pretend I have flags. Bear with me. They weren't planning on assigning you support staff. I have had quite a few friends get hired into positions where the physicians in the practice and or even the PAs, they all have MAs or nurses to help like room the patients, get the vitals, go through the calls, go through the paperwork, call people back, explain labs. But they, as nurse practitioners, were expected to do all of that for themselves because they're already nurses and know how to do it. For real. And you had to see the same number of patients, mind you. You got no like extra time in your schedule for this. I precepted at a place like this. And while I am like in no way above grabbing a set of vitals, assisting with a urine sample, calling a patient back, like in a healthcare office, it makes sense for those tasks to be typically delegated to someone else so that I can do the job that only I can do in a case like this. Teamwork makes the dream work, my friends. And you being asked to do everything because you're already a nurse, that is not teamwork. That's just dumping on one player. It's not a good look. Those people do not respect you, your time, or your license. And you say, bye-bye. Number 6, if the phrase, technically this position has working hours, but we really do value our patients and expect you to be available whenever needed, comes out of their mouth, and you also don't want to work in your downtime, this is not going to be a position for you. Employers often don't have a problem with blurring the lines of boundaries, even the nice employers. They don't even always do it intentionally, but healthcare is a field where it's very easy to blur the lines of boundaries, and it can lead to a lot of burnout and stress, and you have to really stand up for yourself. So if they say something like, we can't define your work hours, that's code for you will be working all the time, which if that's the environment that you love and you crave and you are totally like a career human and you just love being in it and being needed like that all the time, awesome. I'm not that human. I want to go home and live my life. So when I heard those words in a few interviews, I was like, thank you so much for the chat. Goodbye. Boop. So you just decide there. The 7th red flag is being unable to shadow. I cannot recommend enough that shadowing at your current position, you need to do that for at least a day. And maybe shadowing 2 different people, shadowing on multiple days is great. I shadowed for 2 days because I wanted to know if one day was a fluke. I was like, okay, what are the chances that like I saw a good day here and then I saw a second day and that one's a disaster. People weren't acting. And it was so helpful to see how the practice ran. The woman I worked for was super duper kind, very knowledgeable, and her patients genuinely loved her. The vibe was laid back and she welcomed my questions, which I realized while I was shadowing her. She gladly said yes when I asked to shadow. She was excited. She's like, oh yeah, I want you to fit in. And she was looking for someone who would feel at home there. But what if they say no? If they don't even want to offer to let you shadow their office? That's weird. Why? What are they hiding? Even if you cannot go into the patient encounters, like I've heard some people say like, oh, it's against HIPAA, you should at least be able to follow the provider through the office to see how it runs. Kind of sit with them while they're charting. They're hiding something if you cannot shadow. Maybe they don't want you to talk to the MAs. Maybe they don't want you to see the overwhelming inboxes and stressed employees, all the tissue boxes everywhere. Declining shadowing was pretty much an immediate no for me in terms of job hunts. And I would encourage it to be one for you as well. Red flag number 8. When you are shadowing or even during the interview, if people seem annoyed by your questions, that's not good. I have precepted in environments where questions were viewed as annoying, and I've precepted and worked in a place where questions were embraced. And I cannot tell you how nice it was to work in a place where questions, especially as a new grad, where my questions were not met with like, how do you not know that? But instead they were in an environment where it was okay to talk it out and gain insight from a more experienced clinician. If you as a new grad, you just have so much, in any position really, you have so much to learn. Healthcare is all about like continually learning. So if you are in a space that looks down on that and they're annoyed by your questions or they don't want to teach you about something, then this is probably not an environment that will be very friendly in general. It's not going to be like a nice, warm, fuzzy educational experience. Phrases I've heard used to kind of like allude to this, where we love self-reliant, independent, confident nurse practitioners, AKA you need to know how to run, not walk right out of the gate. And please do not stop by, go and ask questions. Education, I think having someone who doesn't mind educating and supports you with your questions is the most important thing of anything that you find in your future job. Red flag number 9, a crazy non-compete. A non-compete, if you aren't familiar, is a thing where in your contract, it says that if you leave the practice, even if they fire you, you can't join a job in a certain vicinity around their location for X number of years. If they want you to sign something saying like you can't work within 40 miles for 3 years, then no, like just no. Most non-competes are a little bit more reasonable than that. I believe non-competes are not legal if the nature of the non-compete excludes you from finding a job at all. So like if you live in the middle of nowhere and they're like, oh, 20 miles, and you're like, there's nothing, like we're the only town in like 100 miles, like they can't do that because then you wouldn't have a job. But a lot of non-competes are legal because if you live in a bigger city, there are offices within 20 miles, if that makes sense. I did not have a non-compete because, like I said, I was the first provider that she hired. I don't even think it occurred to her. She was a very like, she wasn't like thinking in legal terms of me like trying to screw her over. She was like a good human. But my friends had very unreasonable non-competes. Some negotiated out of them and some just blatantly ignored them and went somewhere else anyways and crossed their fingers they wouldn't get sued. I think one person did have some kind of legal thing, but it fizzled. Anyway, if you are looking from a crazy non-compete from day one, I bet you it is not the only crazy thing happening in that office. You might just want to scamper right away. And number 10, it is a red flag if they do not want to offer you any admin time or even talk about it. Admin time is where you are there, you're being paid, and you're doing things like catching up on charts, answering patient phone calls, doing all the refills, looking at the prior auths, doing the millions of things that you have to do behind the scenes that pile up. I know for some people, this won't be a red flag. Some people are like hardcore and they're like, I don't need admin time. I'm like, I don't know how. But practices that value their employees, in my opinion, either have super long appointment windows so that you can get all of that done within the appointment time or offer admin time. And if they don't do that, then they are more worried about making money than letting you get all of your work done and having meaningful patient experiences. Because if not, you're like just whipping through it. You're not talking to people and really knowing them. Even with having like half an hour appointment times, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's not a good look. And another thing they're saying, if they have super short appointments and they don't offer admin time, is that they know you can't get all of that done. So they are saying, I expect you to either provide really crappy patient care or to work at home. And I bet it's the latter. I bet they won't be thrilled if their patient satisfaction scores come back bad or you miss something. Then that's on you too. And don't you dare say you didn't give me time. They won't like that answer. The court will not either. So they just want you to work from home. And even if they do not out of the gate say like, oh yes, we offer admin time, if they are open to discussing it, okay, great, that's better. Let's see what we can negotiate. Like maybe no one's asked for it before and they're like, what is this? But if you bring it up and you express your concerns and they just shut it down, then you say, bye-bye. And there we go. Those are my 10 red flags I could think of right off the top of my head. As I was going through these, I was like, there's more. I'm going to have to make another video for this. But if you are curious about the other aspects of this conversation, make sure to subscribe because like I said, we'll be going over questions I wish I had asked, different tips, all of the different things in this mini series. If you have any red flags that you know of, please leave them down below so we can all learn from your experiences. Thank you so much for spending some of your precious time with me and everyone else in this community, and I will see you next time. Bye. Man, I can't believe I couldn't find red flags. I have 2 toddlers. How do I not have red flags?